Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Sundstrom, and welcome to the Kalamazoo Institute of Art's Art Break at Home on July 27th, 2021. This is one of our very last art breaks at home. We will return to the building starting in September. We'll have one art break at home in September and one in person, and by October, we shall, pending anything happening, be back in the building full time. So we are so thrilled to welcome Amber Oudsema today to the KIA's Art Break at Home for a talk on Beverly Pepper. But first, some really quick housekeeping. Upcoming events at the KIA, August 10th, the next Art Break is Printmaking and Pandemic Part 2 with Deb Matson. So if you enjoyed Part 1 or if you're curious about how artists throughout history have portrayed pandemics, please join us. Art Detectives, the very last virtual Art Detectives will be August 14th. So if you know any young artists between 4 to 8, it can be over, it can be under, that's fine. We'll be reading Toy Boat by Randall DeSev and Lauren Long and making a fun project. August 19th, we will have an artful evening, a Thursday evening talk with Barry Bauman, an art conservator. And August 24th, we will be welcoming Emily Woolshield for a virtual talk on being a multidisciplinary jewelry and fiber artist. Please remain on mute for the duration of this program, but if you have got any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat, and there will be time for a questions at the end. Now, please join me in welcoming Amber Oudsema. Amber Oudsema is the Curator of Arts Education at Frederick Meyer Gardens and Sculpture Park. She also teaches art history at Muskegon Community College and Grand Valley State University. Her master's degree in art history comes from George Mason University. She grew up in Muskegon and has been working as an arts educator for 10 years. And we are thrilled to welcome her. Welcome, Amber.
Thank you. Thanks for that introduction. I'm going to share my screen. Prepared a PowerPoint. That one. So I'm honored to join you and to be asked to talk to you about Beverly Pepper. We have a large-scale sculpture of Beverly Peppers at Frederick Meyer Gardens and Sculpture Park called Galileo's Wedge. And with our most recent exhibition on her work, we were gifted a large amount of two-dimensional work as well. So I'm going to show off a little bit of everything. And of course, you have a piece at the Kalamazoo Institute of Art that's in the current exhibition on some of the permanent collection. So to go back to the beginning, Beverly Pepper was born in 1922 in Brooklyn, New York. And she was always an artistic person, daughter of 2 Jewish immigrants. And when she was ready to go off to college, her mother was okay with her going into the arts, but asked her to perhaps try something that would help make money rather than being a starving artist. So she went to Pratt for advertising design, photography, and industrial design. And she did work for a few years in advertising design. But that was not her forte. So she continued to study and joined the Art Student League in Brooklyn. And then in 1940, she joined the Académie de la Grande Chaumière in Paris. So here she is painting in the early 1930s while she was in college. And she started her career as a painter. So when she went to France, she studied under a couple of masters of Cubism. Fernand Léger is one of them. He was really well established in Paris already. This is one of his pieces, Three Women, from 1921, and you can see the Cubist influence there. And so his style is a little bit post-Cubist, at this point, but certainly at this time, everyone is inspired by Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque. And so this is where his background is from. And then she also studies under Andre Lhote. This is another image of three nude females. You can really see the Cubist influence here. And of course, Cubism is a technique where painters would try and paint all viewpoints, all 360-degree viewpoints at the same time in a two-dimensional artwork. So that's where you get those planes kind of coming from as a play with a visual interaction. You know, and this happens because the turn of the century, we have the Industrial Revolution, the invention of photography, and artists start looking at the human figure in a different way. So she's certainly very familiar with abstraction. So her early work, this is from our collection of 2D work, and many of them are kind of more sketchy. They might be studies for larger paintings, but they're beautiful in their own right. This is an image from Vernon Normandy, and in 1949, it's just a few years after World War II. So she is studying in this area, and you know, Normandy is known as the location for D-Day, the invasion from the Allied army or military. And so I think that there is a sense of inspiration that comes from World War II in her early work, certainly. And here we have a beautiful town with swatches of color. You get the reference of buildings, so there is a sense of the humans who are living there and who have made it through this war, but it's still very gestural. And I think that these colors of browns and blues and greens kind of give it almost this chaotic feel, almost a little sickly, but still with these bright pops of color, still energetic and alive. So she's working in social realism at this point in the 40s and 50s. Post-World War social realism is pretty common at this time period. Artists are looking around and they are seeing, sorry, I'm going to hit the light. Hopefully you're mostly looking at the PowerPoint, but she is inspired by the people around her who have survived this very traumatic event together. It was very destructive in both the loss of human life as well as the architecture. People and towns are struggling to just build themselves back together. So in this image that is untitled, we have a figure who is, resting their head on their arms, and it could be sleeping or just taking a rest, but with the shoulders hunched in the way they are, what little facial features that we have, we can see are an indication that this person is perhaps depressed, and not in the best mood, from what we're seeing there. Now, in 1952, she has her first solo show in Rome that was presented by Carlo Levi. And I have a quote from, I think, an article around that time that she was painting anyways, that a journalist had said, a painting by a 30-year-old American mother was hung among 60 works of many of the greatest artists in Rome in an art show, including Goya, Renoir, Manet, Matisse, and Picasso. And you might have noticed in that list that she's the only woman. The rest were men. And of course, her occupation is basically listed as a mother. So that's a trend that you see anytime that you're learning about Beverly Pepper, is that while she did not consider herself a feminist, in that she's making a roaring call for feminism per se, she is breaking boundaries every step of the way. Anyways, so here's another image from Cannes in France. No color on this one, more of a sketch, but still she has a lot of dynamic energy in her two-dimensional artwork that when she switches gears, you don't see it in the same way. So again, kind of this post-World War II perspective. This is a beautiful little landscape, and you don't see any kind of destruction, but you also don't see the human figures there either. So this survivability and a little bit of hope, but also a little bit of despair. This one is one of my favorites of the two-dimensional works that we have. It's a tailor shop and in Italy, and these are women who are working with their hands, sewing, ironing, working with cloth anyways. And so this really is showing the transformation from women as only mothers to women in the workforce, but not with good conditions, not necessarily idealized by any means. And I think that this is one of the most classical compositions that you see in her work. This very much reminds me of the Italian Renaissance dynamic of the Last Supper that you see over and over again as a subject matter, but with women and not women who would be worshipped in any way. So a little watercolor on this paper really gives just a sense of the fabric and the texture. Again, this is more of a sketch, so it's very dynamic, very quick, gestural strokes with the pen that she's working with. And there's also a sense of calm in it in a strange way as well. So also at this time, when she is living and working over in Italy, she meets an American journalist named Curtis Bill Pepper. And he is the American journalist, author. He was Newsweek's Mediterranean bureau chief in Rome from 57 to 69. And so within just a few months of meeting, they marry. And this is an image of them from around 2014. So they stayed together. And in fact, actually, I believe that Bill Pepper died in 2014. But in 1960, Beverly Pepper takes a trip to, she tours Asia for 7 months with her daughter, and she comes to Cambodia, where she gets a tour of the Angkor complex. So in the 9th through 15th century is this empire of the Khmers in Cambodia. So Cambodia is located pretty close to India, and both of the major religions in India migrate over to Cambodia, and those include Hinduism and Buddhism. So the Angkor complex, each king, emperor at their reign builds a new part of this complex. So this is Angkor Wat, which is dedicated to either Vishnu or Shiva in the Hindu religion. And there's also Angkor Thom, which I believe is a Buddhist site. It is, it had been rediscovered, and I want to say the somewhere between the 70s and 90s. Sorry, I don't have that. Nope, 1960, sometime before 1960. So at this point, though, it is partially excavated and it is covered in these banyan trees. So these trees grow through the ruins of the brick and stone at the site, and the roots intertwine and just cover the site. And here you can see two Buddhist monks who are walking through Angkor Wat there. But it was abandoned in the 15th century or sometime shortly after that in the medieval period. And so the jungle that it sits in took over the site. And when it was rediscovered and excavated, it was amazing to see just how vast this complex was, how detailed the sculptural elements and the architecture is. And certainly when Beverly Pepper explored, it became a very important part of her life. And it changed kind of everything for her. I have another image of some banyan tree roots that don't need to be under soil. So Khmer Emperors, I'm just checking my notes. There's a quote from Beverly Pepper. She said that she walked into Angkor Wat a painter and left a sculptor. So inspired from that space, this is an image that she drew while she was there. She drew with sticks. She just used the stopper of an ink bottle and dipped the stick into it. And this is the beginning of her break from her past. So in this image, we have what is remotely a human figure, but you can see all of the lines in here are intertwining and curvilinear, very similar to the roots of the banyan tree. And you can tell that there's an inspiration from that, and perhaps some of the abstracted through time sculptures that were on those stone buildings. And then shortly after that is this drawing from 1961. And the quote she has here, "People don't understand my abstract images owe a lot to the figurative." Now, if you tilt your head to one side, you might recognize the oval here where she started with a human face, a brow line here, eyes here, and a nose potentially, which looks very kind of simplified and almost tribal. People used to describe this as primitive style that is just the human figure simplified, abstracted to a point that it is almost non-recognizable. And she drew it originally horizontally, but when laid vertically, it is more abstract here. So when she comes back from Cambodia and Angkor Wat to Italy, where she spends most of her life, although she did also own a home and studio in New York, so she was often back and forth. Her neighbor had cut down several massive elm trees and was going to either sell them or throw them away. And she asked if she could purchase them, and she immediately began sculpting. So this is one of the most early sculptures from her, and it is made out of that elm tree from the neighbor's yard. So you can see the complementary nature between the material and the shape, but it's also referencing those curvilinear intertwining roots of the banyan tree. And then the title as toro or bull is a reference to her daughter who took the trip with her and has the astrological sign of Taurus. And there's a potentially slight indication of, well, I don't know, potential or slight, but indication of bull horns at the top here with both of them. But that is it when it comes to anything recognizable. This is non-objective or non-representational at this point. So a move from the figurative to something that you don't even recognize any objects in it, a focus on line, shape, texture. And this one's at the San Francisco MoMA. So this is the iconic photo of Beverly Pepper in her full metal working gear here. I will say, well, to back up one, she exhibited for the first time as a sculptor in 1961 in New York and at Rome, and with a critical presentation by Giulio Carlo Aragon. But in 1962, she was called up and asked to participate in a festival in Spoleto in Italy. And this is metal sculptures that everyone is working on. Well, she said yes, because she learned as a child that you don't say no to an opportunity. But she had no idea how to work with metal. So she went to a local blacksmith and iron worker and asked him to teach her how to weld. And she picked that up pretty quickly. The hard part, the catch-22, as she mentioned, she had to work in factories, in foundries to work with metal, and that was not done by women. So she would have to use the men's room, even because there was no thing as a ladies' room. She had to wear all of the full gear, but you can see too that she still does her hair and makeup because she still needed to be a lady. And so at this point, you know, women have entered the world of art. You know, you see a lot of women in the Impressionist movement as painters, and this is now par for the course. What you don't see a lot of women doing is sculpting. And what you rarely, if ever, see women doing in a sculpting is working with metal, because it was considered a man's job. It's heavy lifting, it's machines, it's, you know, the full face mask, the protection. And as she said, no one told me like that I shouldn't work with art, that I couldn't do anything. So she just did it. So she mastered metalwork by the mid 1960s, and she never looked back. This was the turn in her career that if she had not been invited to Spoleto, she might not have started what made her famous. And I'll say at that festival, she displayed artwork with Alexander Calder and David Smith, and I believe Richard Serra was there too. And so this becomes important to her career as well. So I wanted to feature the piece that is in your collection, and I might butcher the pronunciation, so forgive me, but Torre Pieno nel Vuoto, in English loosely translates to full tower in the void, at least according to Google, which I think is a fantastic name. But you can see here that there is this sense of verticality that is become synonymous with Beverly Pepper's sculptures. And that vertical line, and this has no reference to any human figure, to animals, to landscape. It is completely non-objective or non-representational. And so it's just about the line, the shape, and the surface texture. And so you have visual interest, you have a sense of a little bit of a dynamic. These diagonal lines indicate a little bit of motion, but then you have a rectangle up top, and these vertical lines become really important. And verticality, vertical lines are often seen in religious spaces. There is that urge to look up, to continue that line, sight. And so there's a bit of a reference to the heavens above in anything that has a strong vertical focus. And these also, this verticality is something that she uses often in these kind of totem-like columns that we'll see in just a moment. So the sense of spirituality, of mystery, of something more than just the piece. She, early on in the sculpting, becomes very important to her. So one person that she is often compared to, that she did work with and was inspired by, is David Smith. So here is Beverly Pepper's Prisms from 1968, and we can see this very geometric box, cube, rectangle shape with stainless steel. Here is David Smith's Q by 12, and this piece is actually at Frederick Meyer Gardens and Sculpture Park right now. It's on loan from the Hirshhorn in DC. And one of the things that he did, because he had a lot of different styles, but one of them were these very geometric shapes with stainless steel. So yes, she is influenced by him. The differences being that she has this highly polished, reflective surface on the exterior of her shapes, whereas David Smith, when he's polishing or buffing them, would create this kind of organic shapes and lines in this. So it's not so reflective with the stainless steel. But there is that the open hole so that you can see through it. And same with Beverly Pepper's. So the space around the sculpture becomes really important as well. So similar ideas, different techniques and processes. So she has also been known to say she felt like painting reached too small of an audience. So with this new sculptural medium, well, maybe not so new, 10 years later in 71, she is doing some totem style vertical pieces. She is doing some highly reflective stainless steel pieces with a focus on geometry. And then she's also doing some land art. So this one is one of her first ones between 1971 and 75. This is her environmental project in Dallas Land Canal and Hillside. And it's connecting art and environment. And she uses grass, sand, and hay. So we can see this is the metal part, Corten steel. She's one of the first Americans to use Corten steel, and it becomes really popular at this time because it looks as though it has rusted, but the process kind of ends there. So it's not continuing to degrade as quickly as a piece of metal that has rusted. So it looks like rust, but it's not rust. But it creates this really beautiful, warm earth tone that connects with the earth and the land that she is working with. And then the other side of the triangle is a grassy area. So it's not just set in the landscape, it is part of the landscape. And while she felt that painting didn't reach a wide enough audience, that is still her background. And some of the two-dimensional pieces that we have are a bit of experimentation in medium from her. So she has a few of these spray paint on paper. And what is so different about these ones than the ones in the 40s and 50s is that there is no reference to the human figure or a landscape. This is no longer the social realism post-World War II. This is, again, an exploration of the non-objective, and color and line and shape. So you have these vertical lines that she loves, but you also have the diagonal lines that she enjoys. So diagonal lines indicate motion, and vertical lines indicate that sense of spirituality. And I think that the lines in here that have a bit of light, it almost to me looks like light coming through a stained glass window. But that is my head deciding what it might look like. Here's another one that is just diagonal lines. So this sense of movement and almost chaotic gestural space, this reminds me a little bit of her earlier work, but that it is completely abstracted. Okay, so pure abstraction she's looking at. But a lot of, as she is so focused on sculpture, a lot of the two-dimensional work that we have are studies for those sculptures. So here is a study for the Todi columns in 1978. And you can see again these very vertical lines, and they are columns. And here are the Todi columns. So these are for, she lives in Todi in Italy at this point, and they were installed in 1979 for a show, and then they were just reinstalled in 2019 permanently. So they are still there now. So in 72, she had attended the 34th Venice Biennale, and she moved to Todi, and she built her atelier factory on site of her home. And then that's not what I was looking for in my notes, but a couple other things about these pieces. They're not just vertical though, right? They have shapes that are kind of part of the sculpture. So there's a bit of a reference to tools. They almost look like tools. And then just there's a little bit of extra visual interest there. And then by using the Corten steel and making it look rusted, there's a little bit of a reference to something that's very old or ruinous. So there's a connection again to that trip to Cambodia. And if they are tools, they're too large for humans to use in their toolbox. Again, this is another study for another piece of art, or another sculpture, but I really appreciate this one, and I like the very soft watercolor in the background with that. But here are some that are similar to that drawing. So, and you can really kind of see what I was talking about with the reference to tools. This one looks like a drill bit almost. And there's also a reference to architecture. Looks kind of like a banister to me. But she has some that are very, very thin, some that are a little bit thicker, but the thinner they get, the more vertical they are. There's not a person in this for reference to scale, but they are way too big. Again, this will not fit in my drill at home, this drill bit. But then it makes you question, who is it made for? Who are these made for if they are tools? Which then brings us to our piece, Beverly Pepper's Galileo's Wedge from 2009. Again, made out of Corten steel. I stand to about here maybe. So it is very tall. I should put the dimensions in there, sorry, but it is a wedge. It is a very simple tool. But as Galileo's wedge, we have a little bit of a reference to the Galileo space ship that was sent to space, that she was very influenced by. Also this historical figure that then becomes kind of this legendary figure in our history for his influence on the world of science and of space. And then, so that makes you wonder if we've got to focus on space. This is a huge tool. If it is a tool, it's very vertical. It's pointing towards space. So you get a little bit of a reference. Perhaps this is a tool for the gods. She has never quite come out and said that. She does like people to make their own interpretation. But I think that the use of her titles in particular give us a little bit of a clue, a little bit of a hint towards that. And then in 2019, her curve pieces, or the curved iron or corten steel was installed at the Areopagus Museum in Rome. So she continued working for quite some time. She also is quoted as saying, "My influences are historical." I probably should have read this like Galileo's wedge, but Trajan's column, Cleopatra's obelisk, the Roman Forum, amphitheaters in Sicily, Greece, and Turkey. She focuses on the present as a projected from the past. So of those, Trajan's column, Cleopatra's obelisk, these are people who are larger than life in these historical space, but also claimed to be gods themselves. And there's the amphitheaters in Greece were used as the theaters of Greece were used for religious ceremonies. So there is a long history kind of this mixture of something a little spiritual, something a little larger than life, that is more than just the piece. The piece is very simple. It's just a geometric, it's a plane, but there's so much more to it than that. So the other artist that she's often connected with is Richard Serra, who is also using corten steel right about the same time as Beverly Pepper. He also likes curvilinear lines, so kind of you get that with the curve pieces of hers. Some of the difference though in their work is that she's going up while Richard Serra is often going out. Serra really liked to disrupt what people were doing. So as you can see with a sense of scale here, the people who are just walking in or out of the space cannot see or interact with really the people who are inside. And he very famously had a piece, The Tilted Arc, that was set up in New York City that made people have to walk around it to get into a government building, and people complained to a point that it was taken down. He was very upset because it was site specific. So he threw away the piece, said it couldn't work anywhere else. So and again, some similarities, plenty of differences, but influenced by one another for sure. So a quote that I really appreciate from her is that I wish to make an object that has a powerful presence, but is at the same time inwardly turned, seemingly capable of intense self-absorption. And I think that kind of says it much better than I am about that sense of a powerful presence, of the physicality, of the historical, the spiritual, but also very simple in design. And I had another slide that I thought I added, but just I'll mention that her last work was the amphisculpture, an amphitheater that she made in Italy as a meeting point, a place to share for students and citizens of L'Aquila together. And it's an environmental sculpture that people will not merely look at, but participate in all year, every season, that she made in 2018. And very sadly, She passed away at 97 last year, February 2020. And as I mentioned, she did not consider herself a feminist, but her work and the fact that she did what she wanted to do, loved every step of the way, and was very a force to be reckoned with, made her an icon of the feminist movement in asking for equal treatment for artists and women all over the world. So that would be my presentation on Beverly Pepper. And I think I saw maybe some chat.
Yes, there are a couple questions in the chat, and thank you so very much. That was very interesting. So if you would like, I can read those. First, we have got, do we know more about how Pepper survived during World War II as a Jewish woman in Europe? Was she able to return to the United States during that time?
That's a really good question. And in my research, I didn't hear much about it. I know that she spent that time in kind of between France and Italy. She did come to New York from time to time, but I don't know how much time or when that was. Really good question.
And another question we have is, how tall are the toady columns?
I don't have the measurements right with me, but they are larger than life. So they are, I would best guess, at least 12 feet tall. But and that's not quite as tall as the Galileo's wedge that we have here, which again, I'm guessing is 30 or 40 feet tall.
So to our audience members, this time is your time. If you have got any questions, you can feel free to type those questions into the chat, or you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask Amber directly. I do have a question, which is I know that she left her archives to Meyer Gardens, and what an amazing thing to receive. But what was her connection to the Meyer Gardens that she selected y'all's organization?
Yeah, I think that the connection that I know of is that she worked with Joe Becker, who was our curator for most of the time. We started as a botanic garden that we just included Fred Meyer's collection of Marshall Frederick sculptures. And from there, Joe Becker was came on and built our sculpture park filled with artist work from all over the world, major players in the modernist and contemporary art world. And he made friends with many of these artists, he and Fred Meyer. And so probably the connection is just that she was good friends with Joe Becker and perhaps Fred Meyer.
Great, thank you. And also from Matt in our audience, the toady columns are between 28 to 36 feet tall. So thank you very much, Matt.
Thank you.
What is her educational background?
Yeah, her educational background, she went to Pratt University Institution in New York for advertisement and design. And then she went to, I always have to read it because it's in French. She went to an art school in France in 1940. There it is, the Académie de la Grande Chaumière in Paris. So,
is she a Michigander? Where is she from? From the United States or?
Yeah, she's from New York, Brooklyn.
Oh, okay. But I really like the choices you showed today. I really like her art, and her sculptures is very, very unique and special.
Thank you. I'll be honest, I started here at Meyer Gardens as a docent, and the first looks at Galileo's wedge, I was certainly impressed with the height, but it's a very simple design, a very simple tool even as a wedge. And it wasn't until I did a little more research on her work that I just absolutely fell in love with her work. And then just recently, we don't have much of a space to show the two-dimensional work. So they're in our archives being taken care of really well. I went in with the registrar to do some research, and they're just absolutely gorgeous too.
She's very talented in all the areas, in sculpture and in the sketches, and it's amazing. It really is.
Yeah, and I think today that's fairly common for all artists to try lots of different types of media, but it was very uncommon during the time that she was working. So that really made her an inspiration to a lot of women in particular.
And when you mentioned that she took up sculpturing or welding and they didn't have any facilities for women, I remember that. Even in this country. So that was interesting to hear that the accommodations weren't there.
Definitely. Yeah. And I was, it's still always surprising to me to hear the report of just being called a mother rather than an artist what she was, and people being shocked by it.
Yeah, I think that's not so uncommon. There's a female artist in our collection whose name I absolutely can't remember right now, who, when she went to the doctor, was never allowed to put down that she was an artist. It wasn't allowed to be her profession. So she had to write down that she was a housewife or a mother. That's all they would accept. And I had a bit of a surprise for our Torre nel Piano Vuoto Due, which is that I've never quite noticed until you showed that picture, even though I've seen it in person. I've never noticed that kind of precarious balance of the two little bits that jut out, and then the rest of it goes up in a different direction. So that was really interesting for me to think about. And also, I was thinking about your collection of the archives. I was thinking about conservation, because I noticed that some of them are markers, which came about in the 1950s. And I know that that's a really hard thing for conservation purposes because they fade so much. So what's is there goals to keep them safe in archives, or to maybe do some traveling or do some exhibition of the archives?
Yeah, and I can't speak too much for what the sculpture department has plans for, but they are currently in the storage area which is temperature controlled as well as light controlled. Many of the sketches are still in the sketchbook, and I think the decision was made to keep the books intact as much as possible. So while some that are loose leaf, they have been matted and mounted or framed to keep the air, the oxygen out of that space to kind of maintain them. But yeah, they are really delicate. So I don't foresee anytime soon them doing any traveling, but every once in a while, I'm sure they'll reach the light of day, and, well, not literally. They'll come out for people to view. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. Would anyone else like to come off mute to offer a question or a comment or a thought?
No, it was a very, very well presented lecture and very informative. And I wonder how you discovered this artist.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I give credit to Joseph Becker, who is our curator. Again, at that time art collection is from the modernist period and contemporary. And Beverly Pepper works in both periods as a modernist, in particular as a post-World War II social realist, as a painter, as an well, she's been labeled definitely a few different things: post-constructivist and just abstract, land art, all sorts of different things. But she certainly fits in several of those different categories. And she has pieces all over the United States as well as Italy and all over Europe as well. So we're very lucky to have her pieces and the two-dimensional archives as well.
I would like to say something about being a female artist. I'm a welder, which is why I was interested, because I like her work and I like the idea that she does extra large pieces so that you can look at a tool or a drill bit and see it in a whole different way. I think that's really impressive, but I also know it's hard to work with steel. And I know that I started out with a size 5 ring 10 years ago, and now I can't wear rings. My hands are a nightmare. And part of the problem is you can't find tools or protective equipment as a woman that fit you. So you're always working with oversized tools, oversized gloves, oversized everything. It's a nightmare in many ways. So I special order a lot of materials so that I'm safe. The other thing is, going back to her age, I know when I was in school, in high school, we had an art class, but we did 2D stuff. Nobody ever thought about sculpture. I think that was true of all the schools predominantly back then. And then when we get into 3D, it's very masculine. As a woman, young girl, I was not allowed to take shop class. That was a boy thing. I wasn't allowed to, there were a lot of things I was not allowed to try. I could take home ec, but I couldn't do the things. Architecture was off limits to me. So to me, it's interesting that somebody broke that barrier and came out and said, no, I want to do this, I'm going to do it. And I think she must have had a fair amount of parental support, I believe. And I think she probably, when she met her husband, she got support there. But it is all about women supporting each other so that we can get to that next level of where we need to be and try these things that were so blocked off for so many years.
Yeah.
So that's the only things I wanted to add. Was getting the equipment to fit you is a real problem. Like I said, I special order gloves just to fit my little hands.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Very interesting.
Well, the other thing I wanted to bring up real quickly was about the drawings that she did, in particular the blue and red one. To me, I saw 3D, and I thought that was really interesting that she was able to paint that. And all I looked at when I saw it was that would be so great as an experimental drawing of how to get beyond that in a 3D picture. To me, it was a sculptural picture. I was really impressed with that one picture, even more so than her extra large things. I think that one was phenomenal. And I think there might be more of those in those archives. It would be a great show to actually see her beginning thoughts, because she wasn't allowed to do those other things. And so she was thinking in 3D way before I believe she started actually doing the physical work. That was my thought when I was going through it. Right or wrong, that was my thought.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, and she has said several times that she just wasn't satisfied with painting, and before that she was not satisfied with advertisement design. But yeah, I think that a lot of people along the way in her life tried to put her in the box of what a woman can do or a woman artist, and she's also been known to say, I don't want to be called a woman artist. I want to be called an artist. Yeah. And I think that says a lot about, while she wasn't, waving the flag of feminism, she was very much calling for equality. And she just wanted to do her work.
You have no idea how many art shows I do. And husbands will come up to me and say, oh, does your husband weld that for you? And it's still, so it's not, this is not a past thing. This is still going on. And I say, no, I don't have one of those. I do that myself. And they're all kind of like, they don't know what to do. I've had men come into my booth and check my welds and say, did you do that? And I'll say, yes. And they'll say, oh, that's not bad. Or that's really good. I mean, it's like, yeah. I mean, what did they expect as a woman? I mean, it's interesting how we're perceived as quality and as artists, especially when you're out of the normal track of what's a woman's allowed to do. Okay, I'm done.
Do you have a sample of some of your work, Lynn?
I do. I have a website, but I haven't updated it in quite a while because my computer is new and my software is old. But it's lynnmcintoshstudios.com. I mean, you can look it up. I mean, it's very organic. I'm right now working with mostly rod, but and it's all hand bent with a vise and a pipe. I don't have any tools. It's just my bare hands. But I have this vision of making things feel like, no matter what the sculpture is, like it's actually growing and thrusting out of the ground. So that sometimes I can't get any other way other than to hand form and actually feel like I'm a piece of steel or a piece of tree sapling thrusting itself out of the ground. So it's a different, I don't know how to, anyway, I don't have tools. I don't have my people. I don't have people doing this stuff for me. I guess that's the thing. If you're going to do it, you have to, I'm at one with that piece and I really feel every single bend and curve I do.
And that's something I was going to mention too of, for one, I hear a lot of artists talk about connecting with the medium in that way of like, they are the work. So that's really neat to hear your perspective on that. And then we have a fair amount of female sculptors in our collection, which is really impressive. And I do get asked from various people of how did the women sculptor make that thing? Which I very rarely get asked that same question for the male sculptors. But the reality is that most of them, especially when you become world famous artists, they have a team. They can, they can also send things out to foundries. But yes, especially early on in starting their work, then yeah, most artists do learn how to work with the material, which is really important. So yes,
well, it's you have to push the material to the picture you have in your head to see how far you can get it to go and where it's going to go and what the material will do. So it's all kind of hands-on, trying to learn about your medium and then move from there. Yeah, so yeah, anyway.
Well, she did the aluminum with the reflective, and I thought that was very interesting. And then this, what is it like to work with aluminum versus the 10 steel?
Yeah, and I've never worked with aluminum is very soft. So the artists I used to sell art, so I have a whole different side of it in addition to making my own. The aluminum is very there's a name for it, tensile strength, meaning it's easier to bend and work with and curve. Steel, depending on the thickness, can get very difficult. And the thing I also found out is when I buy steel from some countries, it has hot, hard, and soft parts to it. So you're trying to get a solid curve, and you may hit one of those hard parts, and then you've got to like go back and work that to get the rest of the curve that you were looking for. So it's I don't know about working with Corten steel. That is one of the things that at some point in time would be great fun. Aluminum would be a whole different welding piece of my welder. I'd have to get a whole new spool. I'd have to get different gas. It's a whole new setup. So I doubt if I would go there at my age. It's just another layer of expense I don't know that I need.
Nobody talks about that, do they?
No, the other thing that's interesting to me is the KIA has welding classes, and that was where I took my first 4 classes, 2 actual classes and then open study. They were all women. There was, I think, 1 man in all the classes we ever took. They were all women. And I thought that was pretty impressive to watch and to see what they were coming up with, because everybody has their own voice of what they want to make. So it's very interesting. All right.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. This has been a very interesting conversation, and thank you so much to Amber Oudsema from Meyer Gardens. I would just like to say that if you would like to see some works by Beverly Pepper, you can come both to the KIA and to Meyer Gardens to see those works on display. And the KIA, I believe, is still doing our 97-cent entry for the rest of the month of July. You just have to book your ticket online, and that is to celebrate our 97th birthday. And we are now open Wednesday through Sunday. So Amber, I don't know if you want to say Meyer's hours.
Sure, we're open 9 to 5 every day except Tuesdays. We're open until 9 p.m. So that's our late day, and Sundays 11 to 5.
Great, thank you so much. And Amber, this has been such a pleasure. It's been so interesting. I certainly have learned so much, so incredibly appreciative of your very valuable time. Would you like to say any last things before we say goodbye?
Anytime. I love this collaboration and partnership, and I love talking about artwork. So, especially the stuff that I know about, which is our collection. So, thank you all for letting me talk at you for an hour.
Thank you everyone so much. Our next art break will be August 10th, if I'm correct. And I'm hoping to see you there for Printmaking and Pandemic Part 2. Thank you, thank you, thank you one more time to Amber Oudsema for your time and for that very interesting talk on Beverly Pepper. And we hope to see everyone both at the KIA and at the Meyer Gardens. And we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.